SkyWatch was actually the original name of a piece of software that the founding team built for astrophysicists. This software allowed astrophysicists to access data from NASA space observatories in near real time. It allowed researchers to do follow-up observations of very high-energy events such as black holes, Pulsars, Magnetars, and things of that sort. In 2014, while we were building this software, we realized that there were really no good software companies or interesting software startups in the space industry. The industry was at the beginning of its transition from being largely a government-focused industry to one that was slowly but surely commercializing. We saw an opportunity to build a leading software company in Earth observation. We actually never set out at first to build an API. The first thing that we did in exploring Earth observation was we attempted to build an application, what we would call an end user application ourselves. So our goal with our first project in 2015 was to build a model that predicted crop yields based on that crop's exposure to greenhouse gas emissions. So we took data from satellites that were monitoring greenhouse gas emissions, as well as infrared sensors that were able to detect the health of crops, and we started to build this model. The most insightful part of this project was the fact that it took us about 9 weeks to gather and collect the data that we needed to build this model, and only about 1 week to build the actual model. And it was at that point where we realized that even as experts in the satellite data realm, if it was going to be that difficult for us, who know satellite data really well, if it was going to be that difficult for us to find and collect this data, people who have never used satellite data before were going to struggle to ever use this data type. So that's when we realized the real opportunity in Earth observation was making this data easily accessible and affordable to all. It's worth asking the question, why is it even important to make Earth observation data accessible and affordable to all? At SkyWatch, a lot of our inspiration actually came from the GPS industry. 20 years ago, people were very skeptical that GPS as a technology would be useful to any civilian outside of the military. In fact, there was a big push to not make GPS signals accessible by civilians. When GPS did become accessible to civilians, the largest market opportunity that was identified at the time would be the sailboat navigation industry at about $200 million per year. But something really interesting happened. Many people who didn't have access to this data before took these capabilities and built all sorts of interesting use cases and applications that were never thought of by the original creators of the technology. GPS all of a sudden became fairly standardized, accessible, and affordable. And because of that, anybody in the world was able to easily build an application that leveraged its services. As a result, the GPS industry grew from less than $1 billion in 2000 to one that is approaching over $80 billion per year today, and one that supports trillions of dollars of products and services globally. In fact, many of our businesses and many of our daily lives would be disrupted if GPS was not available to us today. So we took a lot of those same principles, and we identified that if we could apply those principles to Earth observation, which at the time held all of the inverse characteristics, it was unaffordable, inaccessible, and fairly fragmented. If we can turn that around, and if we could make Earth observation affordable, accessible, and standardized, we could enable a very large growth in the market for the use of this data and enable applications, products, and services that before could have never existed. A majority of people likely take GPS technology for granted. However, we likely wouldn't be able to live our normal lives without it. We use it to do things like navigate our way to our office, navigate our way home. A lot of people don't also realize that the stock exchange is dependent on GPS technology. Stock exchanges use GPS technology to timestamp every single trade and transaction that happens on top of it. In fact, the internet would not function without GPS technology. The internet uses GPS as its core timing function. In order to understand why Earth observation data is largely inaccessible, unaffordable, and fragmented, we have to look at its origins. Like GPS, Earth observation began as a service largely directed at government. There's nothing wrong with that, but you have to really understand the government use case. It is a customer that likes to map really large areas at a fairly infrequent volume of time. So imagine needing to map your country, your state, your city on, say, an annual basis. As the industry has evolved and new use cases have been identified, the real opportunity of growth for Earth observation is in the commercial sectors. However, this new emerging customer base has needs of Earth observation data that are completely opposite of what the government needs. Commercial sector needs to monitor very small areas. Think of a parking lot, a construction site, or a farm. And they need to monitor those areas very frequently, on a weekly basis, every couple days. So you have government that needs very large areas very infrequently, and you have commercial companies that need very small areas and very frequently. What we identified when we started our company was that the infrastructure that was supporting the Earth observation industry was not conducive to supporting the emerging commercial market. And that's what we set out to build. In 2018, we released our first product, Earth Cache, which is an API for satellite imagery. The goal of Earth Cache is to enable any organization in the world with the ability to easily order and receive satellite imagery. Our mission here at SkyWatch is to democratize remote sensing data through a simple user experience in an effort to enable new solutions that harness the power of sensors to better our world.